I've been a quiet man most of my life. Not the kind of quiet that gets mistaken for weakness, the kind that gets mistaken for permission. For 63 years I built something out of nothing, kept my word, earned my name, and tried to be the kind of man my father would have recognized. The day my son looked me in the eye and told me to sit down and apologize, I made a decision, and I haven't regretted it since. Let me back up. My name is not important. What's important is that I spent 31 years as a licensed structural engineer in the state of Ohio. I built a reputation the old way, slowly, carefully, one project at a time. I was not famous. I was not wealthy by any dramatic measure. But in the professional circles that mattered in my field, my name carried weight. That weight was not a gift. It was something I constructed, the same way I constructed everything else, with patience, precision, and an absolute refusal to cut corners. I have 2 children. My daughter, Carol, lives in Portland and calls me every Sunday without fail. She's steady and kind, and she married a good man who treats her well. This story is not about her. This story is about my son, Derek. Derek is 34 years old. He has his mother's eyes and, God rest her soul, her stubbornness. Margaret passed 8 years ago breast cancer, caught late, fought hard. After she was gone, it was just me and the 2 of them, and I poured everything I had left into making sure they were okay. Carol found her footing quickly. Derek took longer. He drifted through his late 20s, started and abandoned 3 different ventures, borrowed money I never asked to be repaid, and eventually landed in commercial real estate development somewhere around 31. I was proud of him for finding a direction. I told him so. What I did not know, what I would not find out until much later, was what he had been doing with my name while I was busy being proud of him. Derek married a woman named Simone 3 years ago. She is sharp and ambitious, and she came from a family with connections in the development world. Her father, Gerald Marsh, ran a mid-sized construction firm that had been doing respectable work in the Columbus area for decades. When Derek married Simone, I shook Gerald's hand at the reception and thought, this is good. This is a solid foundation for my son. I meant it. What I did not anticipate was that Derek and Gerald had decided, somewhere between the rehearsal dinner and the first anniversary, that my credentials were more useful to them than my company. I found out on a Thursday morning in April. I was at my kitchen table with my coffee, reading the paper the way I do every morning, when my phone rang. It was a man named Arthur Bellamy. Arthur had been a colleague of mine for almost 20 years. We'd collaborated on 3 major bridge rehabilitation projects in the 90s and had stayed in friendly contact ever since. He was semi-retired now, still consulted occasionally, still sat on the review board of the Ohio Society of Civil Engineers. Walter, he said, and his voice had something careful in it that I didn't like. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. I told him I always did. Are you consulting on the Riverside Commons project? The mixed-use development on the west side, the Marsh-Hendricks Group? I set down my coffee. I told him I did not know what he was talking about. There was a pause that told me everything before he said another word. What Arthur explained to me, slowly and with evident discomfort, was that a project prospectus had been submitted to a municipal review board seeking a significant development contract. In the credentials section of that prospectus, my name appeared. My license number appeared. My 31 years of experience appeared. I was listed as the lead structural consultant on the project. I had never been contacted. I had never agreed. I had never seen a single document. I thanked Arthur, told him I would handle it, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time after I hung up. I want to be honest with you here, because I think you deserve that. My first feeling was not anger. It was grief. It was the specific, hollow grief of a man who realizes that someone he loves saw him not as a father but as a resource. That the 31 years I spent building my name had been, in my son's eyes, an asset to be borrowed without asking. I sat with that for 3 days. I did not call Derek. I did not call Gerald Marsh. I pulled the public filing through a contact at the city office and read every page. My name was on the cover sheet, in the credentials appendix, and referenced twice in the body of the narrative. It was thorough. It was deliberate. This was not a clerical error. This was a decision someone made. Now, and I want to be fair, I considered the possibility that Derek had convinced himself I wouldn't mind, that he'd told himself his father would approve if asked, so why bother asking? I have seen that kind of reasoning before. It is still wrong. It is still fraud. But I know my son, and I wanted to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I opened my mouth. 3 days after Arthur's call, Derek and Simone came to my house for Sunday dinner. This had been a standing tradition since Margaret died every few weeks. Sunday dinner at my house. I cooked. I always cooked. That evening I made pot roast and potatoes, the same meal Margaret used to make for my birthday, because I wanted to be sitting at my own table, in my own home, on ground that was mine. Derek came in the back door the way he always did, called out "Dad," dropped his jacket on the chair by the door. Simone hugged me. I asked about the drive. Everything was normal. We ate. I let them talk. Derek mentioned a project going well, mentioned something about a potential investor meeting. I nodded. I passed the bread. I waited. After dinner, when Simone was in the other room and Derek was helping me clear the table, I asked him a simple question. I said, "Derek, are you working with Gerald on the Riverside Commons proposal?" He said yes without hesitating, which told me he didn't know Arthur had called. I said, "Am I on the prospectus?" And there it was. The half-second pause. The recalibration behind his eyes. He set down the plates he was holding. "Dad, I was going to talk to you about that." I said, "When?" He said it was a formality. He said my name added credibility that would help the project get approved, and once it did, he'd planned to bring me in properly, as an actual consultant, and it would work out well for everyone. He said Gerald had suggested it. He said he didn't think I'd mind. I want to tell you something, friends. I have been in difficult conversations before. I have told families their buildings weren't safe. I have sat across from contractors who tried to bribe me and told them no. I have given testimony in court proceedings. I know how to hold still when something tries to knock me sideways. I held still. I told Derek that my professional license was not a prop. I told him that my name on a document is my word, my integrity, my liability, and my reputation, and that none of those things belonged to him or Gerald Marsh or anyone else on this earth. I told him I needed my name removed from every version of that prospectus, the submission copy, the file copies, and any correspondence where it had been referenced, and that I needed confirmation in writing that it had been done. I gave him until the following Monday. He looked at me like I had just slapped him. "Dad," he said, "do you understand what that does to the proposal? We've already submitted. The review board meets in 2 weeks." I told him I understood completely. "You'd do that to me?" I want you to sit with that question for a moment, because I have. He asked me if I would do that to him. The man who had used my name without my knowledge or consent asked me if I was doing something to him by requesting that my name be removed from a document I never authorized. I kept my voice level. I told him he had done something to me. I told him this was me asking him to fix it. Simone had come back into the kitchen by then. Derek looked at her, and something passed between them, and then he turned back to me and the conversation changed. He told me I was being rigid. He told me I was always like this, that I'd always been more concerned with rules than with family, more concerned with my reputation than with helping my own son get ahead. He said Margaret would have handled this differently. Using his mother's name was the moment I felt something close to anger. I did not show it. I told him that I would need that written confirmation by Monday. He left without finishing the dishes. Simone said goodbye at the door, quietly, and I noticed she didn't look me in the eye. The following 2 weeks were silence. Derek did not call. He did not send confirmation. I called Arthur Bellamy and told him to formally notify the review board that I had not authorized the use of my credentials on the Riverside Commons submission and that I was requesting a correction be entered into the record. I want to be clear about why I did this. It was not to punish Derek. It was not to destroy the project. It was because my name on a document means I stand behind what that document says. I had no idea what the structural assessments in that prospectus contained. I had never reviewed the site, the soil reports, the load calculations, nothing. If something in that proposal was wrong and my name was on it, that was my license, my livelihood, and potentially my freedom at stake. No father should be expected to accept that, no matter how much he loves his son. The board opened a review. I found out about this not from Derek but from Arthur, who called to tell me the Marsh Hendricks group had requested a delay and that there were questions being raised about other elements of the submission as well. Derek called me on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after our Sunday dinner. He did not say hello. He said, "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I told him I knew exactly what I had done. He told me the delay had cost them a key investor. He told me Gerald Marsh was furious. He told me Simone wasn't speaking to him because her father blamed Derek for bringing a problem into the firm. He told me I had ruined something he had spent 2 years building. And then he said it. He said, "You need to call Gerald Marsh and tell him this was a misunderstanding. Tell him you just forgot you'd agreed to consult. Fix this, Dad, or don't bother calling me anymore." There it is. You heard that right. My son, who had used my professional credentials without permission, who had committed what any licensing board in this country would consider fraudulent misrepresentation, who had put my livelihood at risk without a second thought, told me to lie to cover it up, or lose him. I let him finish. Then I said 4 words. I said, "I won't do that." He said, "Then we're done." I said, "All right," and I hung up. I want to tell you what the next few days were like, because I think it matters. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call Carol crying, though I did call her that weekend and tell her what had happened, because she deserved to know and because I wasn't going to let her be blindsided. She was quiet for a long time and then she said, "Dad, you did the right thing." I told her I knew, but knowing the right thing and feeling easy about it are 2 different experiences. I went to work. I ate my meals. I read my paper. I took my evening walks. I am a man who has buried a wife. I have learned that grief does not kill you, and neither does silence from someone who should know better. 6 weeks after Derek told me we were done, my phone rang on a Tuesday morning. I was in my garage, reorganizing my workbench. I looked at the screen. It was Simone. I answered. She didn't lead with an apology. She led with, "Walter, I think we need to talk." Her voice was tight, controlled. I said, I was listening. What she told me took about 20 minutes, and I am going to summarize it for you, because some of the details are theirs to keep. What I'll tell you is this. The board review had uncovered not just the credential issue, but questions about the projected cost estimates in the prospectus numbers that Simone had flagged internally and been overruled on by her father. Numbers that, when scrutinized, did not hold up. Gerald Marsh had told Derek that the credential issue was the thing that had opened the door to the broader review, and had implied not subtly that Derek had brought this on by not managing his father properly. Simone was calling me, I realized, not entirely on Derek's behalf. She was calling me because she was starting to understand that her husband had made promises to her father using her father-in-law's name, and her father had accepted those promises without asking hard enough questions, and the whole arrangement had been built on a foundation that was never as solid as it looked. When she finished, I said, "Is Derek there?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Put him on." There was a pause, and then Derek was on the line. He didn't say anything. I could hear him breathing. I said, "I'm not going to say I told you so, because that's not what this call is for." I told him I loved him. I told him that had never changed and would not change. I told him that what he had done was serious not just to me, but to himself and to Simone, and that the way through it was not to lie more, but to get in front of it honestly and accept the consequences. He said, "I don't know how to fix this." I told him to start by calling the board directly. I told him to hire an attorney who specialized in regulatory matters. I gave him a name. I told him to have an honest conversation with Simone's father, not a defensive one. And I told him that if he wanted to rebuild something in the development world after this, he was going to have to do it on his own merits, without borrowing anyone else's name, including mine. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm genuinely sorry. Now, I want to be careful here, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, is that it? He says sorry and everything is fine? Let me tell you what I believe about apologies. An apology is not a transaction. It doesn't erase what happened or purchase a return to normal. What it is, at its best, is a beginning, a first step on a longer road. I told Derek I accepted his apology. I told him that rebuilding trust between us was going to take time and that I was willing to walk that road if he was. But I also told him, and I want you to hear this, because I think it matters, that I would never again allow love for my children to be used as leverage against my integrity. Not by him, not by anyone. That the two things, love and integrity, were not in competition in my life, and I would not live as though they were. He said he understood. I don't know if he fully did. Not yet. But I believe he was trying. The Riverside Commons project was ultimately restructured. Gerald Marsh stepped back from it. Derek and Simone are working through things. Carol told me last month that they've been seeing a counselor, which I think is a good sign. I don't know what their marriage looks like from the inside, and that is not my business to know. What I do know is this. Derek called me the following Sunday, not to ask for anything, just to talk. We were on the phone for 40 minutes. He asked me questions about how I'd built my practice in the early years, questions he'd never asked before, questions that told me something had shifted in him, like maybe he was finally ready to learn the slower way of doing things, the right way. I made my pot roast again last month. Derek and Simone came. We ate at the same table. It wasn't entirely comfortable, and I'm not going to pretend it was, but it was honest. And honest is where everything worth building begins. I am 63 years old. I have learned that the people who love you will sometimes try to take from you the very things that make you worth loving. Not out of malice, usually. Out of need, or fear, or a confusion between what is yours to give and what is yours alone to keep. Your name is yours alone to keep. Your word is yours alone to keep. Your integrity is yours alone to keep. If you take nothing else from what I've told you today, take that. And if you're a son or daughter listening to this, I say this with all the love I have. Your parent may have more to offer you than their credentials and their connections. The most valuable thing they have is the example of how they carried themselves through hard things. Pay attention to that. Ask about that. That is the inheritance worth taking. I went back to my workbench after Derek and Simone drove home last month. I stood there for a while, just looking at my tools, all the levels and squares and measuring instruments I'd collected over a career of making sure things were built straight and true. There is something deeply satisfying about a well-calibrated level, about knowing that what you're looking at is actually, measurably, exactly as it should be. I thought about my name on that prospectus. I thought about what it had cost to have it removed, and I thought without any regret at all that it was exactly the right thing to do. Some things you build fast, and some things you build right. The ones you build right are the ones still standing when everything else falls away. That's all I have for you today. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to choose between family peace and your own integrity, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. Take care of yourselves. I'll talk to you soon.